Welcome to episode 162 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to give you my best quick advice on a variety of teacher-submitted topics. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript or to share your thoughts in the comments. I want to start by thanking Teachers Learning Center for sponsoring this episode. If you need graduate level credits for license renewal or a pay step increase, check out TLC's independent study, self-paced format. They have a wide array of great course titles, lots of practical, relevant topics for PD. TLC is accredited nationwide, and you can start anytime. Go to tlcgraduatecredits.com/Angela to get a coupon code. Today we're talking about tricky topics that teachers face in schools. These are issues that it can be difficult for me to offer detailed advice on without knowing a whole lot of specifics. So I'm going to try to avoid getting bogged down in the minutia of very specific situations and instead stay big picture. I'm going to give you my best piece of advice, the one thing, the most important thing that I can say about things like this, about leadership who plays favorites, working with student teachers, a lack of student motivation, kids who can't handle choice, anxiety over teacher evaluations, what to do when you have to teach the same way as your colleagues and they're overcomplicating things, and a couple other topics that podcast listeners have asked about. Let's start with this one. How do I support colleagues when morale in our school is low? My best advice here is to expend less energy on the aspects of the job that you can't change. Be aware of how your mood and energy level is impacted whenever you spend time complaining about systemic issues and massive bureaucratic and societal problems that you have little power to change. It doesn't seem like a big deal, and it can be kind of cathartic in the moment. But repeatedly turning your attention to these things which you can't control will really drain you. You need to tap into what brings you joy, what reminds you of your purpose, and incorporate more of those purposeful moments into your day and into your instruction. Spend the majority of your time with colleagues who use humor to make light of a difficult situation, and people who look on the bright side, or people who are super motivated and ambitious. Now, I'm sure you know all of this already, but the question is, are you doing it? Are you actively spending more time with the colleagues who energize you and refocusing negative conversations when you start to feel hopeless or depressed? Take charge of where your energy is being spent. Notice which people and activities and conversations lift you up and which pull you down. And make small changes to your day to make sure that you're not just giving of yourself all day long without having anyone or anything to pour back into you. The next question is about dealing with administrators who play favorites or don't value fidelity and ethics. Without knowing all of the specifics related to this person's question, let me offer my one best piece of advice. Figure out how to finesse and quietly subvert the system. You're not likely to have a lot of success by repeatedly calling out the favoritism, and being passive-aggressive or complaining about it all the time is not likely to create change either. It's important to understand that we are not working within a meritocracy, not in our schools, not in our country, not in our world. Who you know and your connections have a lot to do with getting ahead and being treated well. Everyone is not treated equally. So you can't just assume that if you're a great teacher or doing a good job at work, that your principal is automatically going to like you and treat you well. Schools are not a meritocracy, which is just a mirror of the truth in society as a whole. The world does not operate that way. So look for ways to subvert that quietly and interrupt the damaging patterns that you see in your school. What are the ends or privileges that you can utilize to fight for more equality for everyone? What are some ways that you can work around the system to get what you need? Don't just hope that if you play by the rules, everyone in charge will do the same. Sometimes you need to play the game. finesse the system or quietly subvert the system in order to move things more in the direction of what's right. The next question is this: how do I handle the stress of knowing that my school is not meeting the needs of all learners? This question was submitted by a teacher who is racked with guilt and really losing sleep over a student who has been shunted into a computer-based program due to low test scores. He's not getting the services he needs, and the school is under-resourced, so the teacher isn't able to do what's best for him either. Here's my advice. The thing to remember about this kind of stress is that it's never about this one student or this one situation. Because even if you could make things right for him, there would still be 1,500 other instances in which you know things aren't being done right by kids. One thing that I have learned is that this kind of stuff doesn't actually bother everyone. Not everyone sees the inequities, and not everyone is so moved by them that they're thinking and talking about it in their free time. If you're experiencing that, it's a special insight that's been placed on your heart. And your reaction to what you're experiencing is an integral part of who you are and the work that you do. So my best advice is to embrace that part of yourself. The fact that your heart hurts over this is indicative that it's part of your mission or your purpose on this planet. You might want to consider making an impact in education through another role at some point in your career. Think about what issues you're really passionate about advocating for, and how you can position yourself to have more influence and ability to create change or to educate others in that arena, and work to right some of these systemic wrongs and injustices in the educational system. Also think about what you can do now in your classroom to experiment with various solutions. That will not only help you make a difference now in your current position, but also pave the way for work you do in the future. The next question is about handling anxiety over teacher evaluations. And what I would say to that is to remember that you can take charge of your evaluation rather than letting your administrators control the narrative. You can check out episode 129. I interviewed Jennifer Ansbach about this, and we talk about how to not take a negative evaluation personally and a whole lot more. So definitely go to EP 129 if you want to know more about this topic. But the primary piece of advice that I would give is to take responsibility for telling the story of your classroom rather than letting someone else tell it for you. Make sure you are documenting and sharing with your administrators all the good stuff that's happening in your classroom. The successes, the PD you're doing. Request that those things be added to your file. That's what Jennifer Ansbach recommended, and I think it's just the best advice that I can recommend in this situation. Don't just wait and hope that your administrators notice the great things that you're doing, or allow them to use a 15-minute walkthrough to be the sum total about what's written in your file. When you decide to be an active participant in the evaluation process, some of that nervousness will disappear because that one short lesson is no longer going to be the entire picture of what goes into your evaluation. Another question is this: what should I do when my colleagues are creating unnecessary work and we have to agree on shared policies? Now, this is a really interesting question because it was submitted by a person who has to reach consensus with her teammates about grading and assessment practices. So she has ideas for streamlining, but her coworkers feel that it would be lowering their standards to do so. The principal has agreed that the team is doing too much, but the colleagues are just adamant that their current workload, which involves around 20 to 30 hours of grading time each week outside of contractual hours, is just what good teachers do. So if I could give one piece of advice to someone who works with colleagues who refuse to streamline their work, it would be to brainstorm specific ways to simplify, preferably some small adjustments that will make a really big difference. Figure out how those adjustments benefit kids and use that as the selling point when you're presenting them to your colleagues so that they don't feel like they're being asked to cut corners. If they feel like they're being asked to cut corners, that's going to conflict with their identity as a person who never cuts corners. You might want to invite your principal to sit in on that discussion and help guide the conversation, because the administrator's affirmation that the team is doing too much and putting too much pressure on themselves will lessen your colleagues' fear that they're shortchanging kids. This is not a situation that is likely to work if you try to force your colleagues to change or threaten them with union involvement because they're creating work for you outside of school hours. The colleagues have plainly stated the root problem. They believe they must teach in this way, and they must spend all their free time grading and planning in order to feel like they're doing a good job. And I think many of us have felt like that in one situation or another. So trying to tap into that empathy can be really useful in coming up with a solution. Nobody wants to feel like they're doing a bad job for their students. In order for your colleagues to be open to another way, they need to feel like this alternative concept is not going to compromise their integrity or cause them to do a lesser job. You don't want your suggestion to conflict with their belief that hard work equates with effectiveness. So anytime you're not in agreement with colleagues on a policy and you have to reach a consensus, figure out the root problem. What is the real issue that's keeping them from seeing things your way? And present solutions that enable them to compromise without feeling like they're being untrue to themselves or untrue to what they believe to be best for kids. The next question is about student teachers. How do I help a student teacher while trying to maintain classroom control? There's a lot of different dynamics that factor in here and a lot of different variables at play. But if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to let the student teacher uncover his or her own unique teaching style without feeling pressure to emulate you perfectly. A student teacher is not going to be a clone of you and has to figure out a better way to engage with the kids that feels authentic to him or her. So don't be afraid of confusing the kids if you have slightly different procedures or rules or expectations. Kids are very adept at figuring out what they're allowed to do with various adults in their lives. They know mom will never allow this one thing, but dad is a stickler for this other thing. And they can get away with this thing with grandma, but when they're with this teacher, they need to follow these other rules. It's good for kids to learn that each person that they encounter has individual needs and preferences, and for kids to learn to respect those preferences, whether it be for different friends, different family members, or different teachers in the school. So if you can embrace this and let your student teacher uncover their own unique teaching style, the entire experience will be a bit smoother. Release that need for control a little bit. Watch and learn from their experimentation and their mistakes. You might discover some really interesting or surprising things about what's effective with your students. The next question is, how do I deal with a lack of student motivation? This is a sticking point for every teacher, I think. And if I could give one piece of advice, it would be to let go of judgment and focus on the shared human experience that you have in common with kids who seem to be unmotivated. Now, that might sound a little woo-woo, but seriously, remember what you felt like when you were going to school every day as a student. Think about how you feel going to school every day now as a teacher. Are you motivated to work hard and be energetic every single day? Do you feel like giving 100% every moment? I mean, you might be thinking, no, but I still show up. I still do my best. I encourage you to examine that. Do you always do your best? Every day, every moment, you put forth 100% effort. You never have an attitude about it. You never take a shortcut. You never turn things in late. I know I certainly don't give 100% on every task all day long, every day. We're talking about basic human motivation and psychology here, and extremely normal behavior for kids. I know that for me, myself, I hated school for most of my childhood, and I definitely hated it for all of my preteen and teenage years. I was super unmotivated. I skipped class all the time. I didn't pay attention. I talked constantly when I did go to class, and I never did my homework. That's a whole other story there, and I will tell you that story actually in a separate podcast episode. But I mention it here because I'm sure that many of my teachers assumed that it was pointless to keep trying with me, and they just wrote me off. I doubt that anyone who taught me in high school would have thought that one day I would be a teacher of teachers and successfully run my own business. It definitely didn't appear like that when I was 16. So let go of any judgment that you might be holding about a kid who seems apathetic. Any kind of judgment that, they're going to grow up to do nothing with their life, or, there's something wrong with them. They're going to just be a loser, basically, and it's not worth trying with them. School is hard work, and it's often boring to learn about things that you don't want to learn about. All of us tend to avoid things that are unpleasant. It's just human nature. And the less that you try to fight that, the happier you're going to be. So let your kids be human. Do your best to plan engaging lessons and help them stay on task, but don't repeat this story to yourself that labels the kids as apathetic or unmotivated, or that they should somehow be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and eager to do whatever you say at every moment. They're human, as are you. So embrace the humanness. Let's talk next about extreme behavioral issues. A teacher wants to know, how do I keep one student from negatively influencing the rest of the class? And this question was submitted by a teacher who has a student that she describes as very defiant and emotional. Whenever she gives him a consequence, he starts yelling and slamming his fists and so on. And because of this, she hasn't been giving him consequences for every infraction, only the major ones. And she's concerned that's a mistake because the rest of the class is now getting rowdier. My take is that it's not necessarily a mistake to choose not to respond to every outburst, particularly if it's going to trigger a major meltdown. I think it's wise to focus on just a couple of target behaviors that you want the student to work on at a time and not get on them about every minor thing, which obviously seems to be creating frustration. In terms of the core of this question, which is about other kids emulating this one child's behavior, my best advice is to talk to the whole class about it. I think sometimes as teachers, we feel like we have to pretend that everything's fine, and any problems have to be handled by you privately later on. So we're just all going to agree to pretend that it's fine that someone just threw a desk 2 minutes ago. We're just going to proceed with the lesson like nothing happened, and we're not going to talk about it, and we're just going to move on with our day. But it's no secret to the rest of the class that something really disturbing just happened, and that there's a child in the class who's really working on self-regulation and managing their emotions. They notice the disproportionate reaction to being told to do something or to experiencing, making a mistake or whatever it was that set the child off. They know it's a disproportionate reaction. And so they're feeling insecure and confused and maybe even frustrated about, kind of being stuck in the room and witnessing that. So if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be to enlist the rest of the class in supporting this child. Have a class meeting and talk about things like this. What helps you calm down when you're upset? How do you practice responding calmly when the teacher gives you a consequence? What would you like others to do when you're upset? What do you wish others would stop doing when you're upset? Now, obviously, the way that you structure these questions and the tone of the discussion will vary according to the age of the students that you teach. But the goal is the same regardless. You want to give the rest of the class a chance to respond to this for several purposes. You want them to have a chance to process their own feelings about it, for one thing. You want the classroom to be a safe place where kids can talk about their feelings and experiences without judgment. You want the rest of the class to empathize a little bit with the child who's struggling. And you want them to share their own strategies for coping, which might help him. And then the next time that he has an outburst, and it's a he in this situation, remind the kids about the types of things that they said would be useful. Take deep breaths, go sit in the comfy chair in the back of the room, listen to music with headphones on, and so on. Give that child who's struggling some strategies to try, and give the rest of the class strategies for responding to him in a constructive way. That way, they're no longer looking at him like, oh, that behavior's okay, and it's okay for me to act that too. This is all perfectly normal and fine. But they're also not looking at him like some unpredictable weirdo that they need to stay away from or be scared of, or, that there's something wrong with that child. They get him. They understand him. They can relate to those struggles because we all have intense emotions, and we all have moments when we're not expressing them in an appropriate way. They understand that the student needs them to respond in helpful ways and encouraging ways rather than ignoring him or emulating his behavior. When the child who's struggling feels that support, rather than feeling the eyes of the entire class just staring at him during an outburst, that's when the behavior is going to start to improve too. What about for a student who can't handle choice? That's what this next question is about. So the whole class is doing things like flexible seating and partner work, but there's a student who just can't seem to handle it. My advice in that situation is to bring the student into the decision making and give limited choice. So say you can sit here or you can sit here. And both of those choices are acceptable to you. Maybe one's close to you and the other one is sort of isolated more in the classroom, so there's fewer distractions. Either choice would work, and then they have those limited choices. You can also level with the child and just say, Partner work doesn't seem to be helpful for you right now. So would you agree that it's more difficult for you to focus when you're with a friend than when you're working alone? Could you make the choice to work alone for these types of assignments? And let's see how that goes. We'll talk again in a couple of weeks and we'll see if you want to change things. If the child can see that this is a problem for them, if they need to work alone, and I think you'd be surprised how often that happens, then there you go. Then that's the problem solved temporarily, and then you can revisit the conversation later. If they insist on working with a partner, then check in afterwards and say, I felt like you talked a lot and the assignment didn't get finished. What can we do about that next time so that it doesn't happen again? I want to try having you work on your own a couple times and see how that feels for you. So give this approach of bringing the child into the decision-making and being really honest and frank about their behavior and their ability to meet expectations. Bring them into that discussion. You're doing this all very matter-of-factly, very, without judgment. It's not, oh, you didn't do the right thing. It's just like, I felt like you talked a lot. The assignment didn't get done. What are we going to do about that? Be matter-of-fact and approach the child to get their input on it. I promise that the student will respond in a much more mature and thoughtful way when you're working together to meet their needs, instead of just issuing a punishment and deciding for the child that she or he needs to work alone. So that's my best advice on 10 sticky situations in schools. If you are facing a problem and you want me to address it in an upcoming podcast episode, go to truthforteachers.com and there's a form there that you can submit to let me know. Your takeaway truth for the week ahead is this: live less out of habit and more out of intent. When you find yourself in a sticky situation, don't be reactive or do what you've always done and just rely on your regular habits to get you unstuck. Instead, be intentional about what the outcome is that you want. Try asking yourself the same question I asked myself when determining how to answer these questions. If I could give one piece of advice, what would I say? Or what would be my best piece of advice for another educator on this topic? Get still for a moment with yourself and really think about the heart of the matter. What's the most important thing to know about the situation? The right answer is going to come to you. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.